the reason there is so much, people have such a difficult time deciding why I've been successful for this long, or trying to quantify my talent, is because it's been so obvious from day one that I wanted to be a star, that people found it very hard to believe I also wanted to be a musician.
To one generation of pop music fans, 1963 is the year that the Beatles exploded onto the scene with their blockbuster single Please Please Me and their first album of the same name. It seems a half-forgotten time now that was the week that was shocked the nation with the first blast of TV satire, and the Profumo Keeler scandal shocked the political world and paved the way for the fall of the Macmillan government. But to a later generation of pop fans, to whom David Frost is ancient and Christine Keeler is a historical figure on a par with Nell Gwyn, 1963 has another significance. For 1963 was the year in which George Michael was born. All the great pop stars whose music and influence last have a touch of the mystery about them. Frank Sinatra transcended mere crooning, Elvis Presley defined early rock and roll, Bob Dylan, Joni Mitchell and Van Morrison are still seen as enigmas. It is harder for groups, which is one reason why their careers tend not to last as long. But just one member who is difficult to pin down can ensure immortality. Just think of John Lennon, Keith Richards, Jim Morrison or Brian Wilson. George Michael, of course, has been both group member and solo star. He shot to fame as one half of Wham with Andrew Ridgeley, then went on to even greater fame and fortune in his own right. But just who is George Michael? His battles with record companies and management teams mark him out as a fully paid-up member of the Awkward Squad, something that has no doubt helped him to survive in the shark-infested waters of the pop world. His sexuality, so long a subject of careless whispers, hit the headlines in early 1998 with an embarrassing arrest at a public toilet in a Los Angeles park for lewd conduct in a public place. Perhaps in another age that would have been the end of his career. But if the Beatles ushered in the permissive era, the year he was born, George Michael benefited 35 years later. Pop fans are supposed to be fickle, but that certainly doesn't apply in George Michael's case. Many suspected that he had been the victim of entrapment. Many gay fans were rather pleased, and many more couldn't care less. Somehow, a rather foolish but quite unimportant act had turned him into something of a martyr. It might have been the end of the George Michael story, but let us use it as a jumping-off point back to the beginning. To repeat, just who is George Michael?
When I was about 14 years old, I remember I was washing up in my father's restaurant and I was listening to something. It was on a tape machine in the restaurant itself, and it occurred to me that some melody shouldn't have gone that way, it should have gone another way. And it suddenly occurred to me that I would have written it that other way. That was the first moment that I ever remember thinking I could write that, but better.
Well, for a start, he isn't George Michael. He is Georgios Kyriakos Panayotou, and was born on June the 23rd, 1963 in his parents' small flat above a laundrette in the North London suburb of Finchley. The young Georgios' father, Kyriakos Panayotou, was a Greek Cypriot who had arrived in London from Cyprus just 10 years earlier with his cousin, Demetrios Jimmy Georgiou. They found jobs as waiters and taught themselves English. Kyriakos even anglicised his name to Jack Panos, and the pair threw themselves into the emerging British rock and roll scene, spending their spare time in the new coffee bars and at dances. And it was at such a North London dance that the newly named Jack Panos met and fell in love with Leslie Ann Gold Harrison from Archway North, London. They married in Holloway and rented a 2-bedroom flat above a laundrette in Finchley, and daughter Yoda was born in 1959. 2 years later, another daughter, Melanie, was born. Jack's hard work brought promotion to assistant manager at the restaurant, and in 1962, Leslie fell pregnant again. After 2 girls, the couple hoped for a boy, and on June 25th, 1963, little Georgius arrived at 73 Church Lane, Finchley. Almost immediately, Jack gave up his job and with a couple of partners opened a restaurant of his own, the Angus Pride in Edgware. He did well enough to buy a semi-detached house in Burnt Oak, Edgware, with a £4,000 mortgage. Little Georgius, now aged 6, had a garden to play in for the first time. The little boy's love affair with music started when he discovered a couple of Supreme singles, and one by Tom Jones, plus an old forgotten gramophone to play them on when he was exploring the garage one day. And for his 7th birthday in 1970, his parents brought him a portable cassette recorder, which included a handheld microphone and enabled him to record himself singing. He also recorded his favourites from the radio, and he bought his first record by Carly Simon at the age of 10. Among the many novelty hits and plain dross, there was the extraordinary David Bowie and the outrageous Elton John, whose music was to play an increasingly important role in the youngster's musical education. The little boy experimented by making up songs and from the age of 7 took violin lessons for 6 years. He found the violin lessons hard and struggled equally with the regular Greek classes that his father encouraged him to attend. His mother, Leslie, was his greatest influence and the closest person to him right until her death in 1997, but his father was the driving force of the family. And by the early 70s, his restaurant business was so successful the Panos family were able to move out to a larger home in Radlett, Hertfordshire. It needed a lot of work though, and for several months the family had to live above the restaurant, where a steak and chips followed by rich Greek pudding diet helped Georgius put on quite a lot of unwanted weight. His father did well enough to open a second restaurant, and the family moved again to Bushey in Hertfordshire. Georgius was still dabbling in music, but the 12th birthday present of a drum kit proved no more inspiring than the violin lessons. A visit to an Elton John concert, though, made a great impression, as did his first day at his new school, Bushey Meads. In the break, he had a mock fight with another boy and they became firm friends. The boy's name was Andrew Ridgeley.
I was introduced as a second-year student into Bushey Meads Comprehensive, and Andrew was appointed to take care of me.
Ridgeley was a few months older and started as the dominant one in the friendship. His father, Albert Mario, was half Egyptian and half Italian, and like Jack Panos, was an immigrant. It was a friendship that didn't appeal to Georgio's family. Leslie clearly felt that Andrew Ridgeley was a bad influence on her boy. She and Jack believed that hard work and education were the keys to a successful life, and Andrew Ridgeley seemed anything but the hard-working type. By the summer of 1976, the two boys were inseparable, messing about with drums and guitar to music taped from the radio and dreaming all the while of fame. Although it was Georgius who had infected Ridgeley with his love of pop music, especially Elton John and Queen, it was Andrew who first suggested forming a band. In the meantime, Georgius decided to improve his image. He was still a big lad, but he started to take an interest in fashionable clothes and to tame his frizzy hair and wild eyebrows. The arrival of perms for men, thanks to soccer star Kevin Keegan, was just what the doctor ordered, and a visit to the optician swapped his old-fashioned glasses for contact lenses. Though he didn't as yet know it, slowly but surely, George Michael was being born. By 1978, the two boys were regular truants, with Georgius cutting his musical teeth by busking in various London Underground stations, sometimes partnered by another friend, Dave Mortimer. He still made Ridgeley wait until after their O-levels before he would agree to form a band. But with Andrew now at the more liberal Cassio Sixth Form College, Georgius found himself expected to stay on at school and take A-levels. Ridgeley wasn't pleased when told that the band would be put on hold until the summer of 1981, and persuaded Georgius to start one there and then. Thus, with Andrew's older brother Paul on drums, plus friends Andrew Lever and Dave Mortimer, now calling himself Dave Austin, was born The Executive. They tried to play West Indian ska music in a dodgy attempt to emulate bands like Madness and The Specials. Touting around rough demo tapes failed to provoke any interest in the band or their music, and the whole experiment eventually fell apart. Both boys were finished with education by now, and although both persisted in their efforts to write songs, it was clearly Georgius who had the real talent. One day, while on a bus going to his nighttime job as a disc jockey at the Bel Air, a dinner dance restaurant near Bushey, he had an idea for a song. A visit to Ridgely's flat, where his partner fleshed out the basic tune with guitar chords, proved highly successful, and so did the song. He called it Careless Whisper.
We actually had a very strong sense of doing something different, which really didn't get appreciated at the time. I mean, there was such a strong tongue-in-cheek element to the first 3 singles, and we were hailed as being some kind of social commentators, like spokesmen for our generation, i.e. that we'd been on the dole. Actually, I hadn't. I mean, Andrew had been on the dole for years, borrowing money off me.
A few other songs saw the light of day during this period also: Wham Rap, Club Tropicana and Come On. With these, the duo created a demo tape featuring parts of all 4 songs. Wham, taken from their song Wham Rap, produced a name they agreed on, and once again the boys did the rounds of the music business with their new tape. They finally found a taker in Mark Dean, whose Innovision Records was being financed by CBS following his success in promoting Mark Almond's Soft Cell and Sheffield band ABC. Dean must have appeared to have the music world at his feet to the 2 youngsters. But in reality, he was almost as much a novice as they were, and the deal he had with CBS did him no favours at all, something that was to rebound back on everyone later on. In turn, the duo's 5-year contract with Innovision was little more than a serf's charter. How often in history of popular music have young hopefuls been taken for a ride before they even knew a cab had been called? It was happening again. Wham now needed a music publishing company and went to a firm run by 2 veterans, Brian Morrison and Dick Leahy. There was instant rapport, but the pair also needed a business manager. A good one would surely have insisted on renegotiating the contracts, but Georgius wanted to manage himself. An approach from Jazz Summers was turned down. Georgius also felt a change of personal name was important. George was pretty obvious, and he had an uncle called Michael. Thus, a star was born. But getting to be a star was a tougher matter than picking a snappy name. The first single, Wham Rap, Enjoy What You Do, failed to dent the top 100. For the next, Young Guns, Go For It, George insisted on co-producing. It reached 48, then started to falter. Leahy pulled out all the stops, and the next week Young Guns was at 42 and earned Wham a spot on the long-running TV show Top of the Pops. The duo's stunning TV debut produced an extra 30,000 orders by the following Monday. Over the next month, Young Guns jumped to 24, then 10, 4 and 3.
We thought we'd make pop records with a little bit of black influence and throw in some humorous lyrics, but unfortunately the humorous lyrics were taken by a lot of people very seriously and kind of shook up our own vision of what we were supposed to be doing.
An astute move saw them re-release Wham Rap, but with an improved mix and with a black and white video which featured the pair wearing black leather jackets. As Young Guns slipped down, Wham Rap went up, peaking at number 8. It was definitely champagne time, but George knew they had to come up with a very strong 3rd single to maintain their momentum. They played safe with Bad Boys, which was similar to Young Guns, and a song George Michael later dismissed as a formula record. The record got to number 2 though, and it was time to get down to some serious studio work on the pair's debut album, Fantastic, with a group of top session musicians. Again Michael co-produced, but the pressure was beginning to take its toll. He had business affairs as well as music and public appearances to take care of. He liked to play hard as well as work hard, and it became clearer than ever that the pair really needed a business manager. Ron Wisner and Freddie DeMann agreed to look after their interest in North America for a short time with an option to carry on. In Britain, Robert Allen of Sins, Muirhead and Allen took them on for 3 months. The tireless Jazz Summers was turned down again, but then he teamed up with the vastly experienced Simon Napier Bell, whose track record in management went way back to the 60s with the Yardbirds. Wham were pop stars, but they weren't rich ones. An attempt to review their contract with Dean's Innovision got nowhere, with Dean claiming he was too tied up by the terms of his own contract with CBS. George Michael exploded in rage. When the album was done, he took the master tapes home and hid them. Dean threatened him with the police, and he had to hand them over. In the meantime, the new Summers-Napier-Bell partnership, no mismanagement, was coming on very strongly, and eventually a deal was made over an Indian meal. Wisner and DeMann kept North America, and No Miss represented Wham everywhere else. All this was done before the release of Fantastic, which was dedicated to the memory of 2 friends. Executive member Andrew Lever had died of cancer, and former school friend Paul Atkins had been killed in a car accident. The album went straight to the top of the charts and sold well enough to spend 113 weeks in the top 100. It spawned another hit single, Club Tropicana, which reached 4th spot. However, No Miss were under instructions to get Wham out of their Innovision contract, and with George Michael refusing to hand over any new recordings to Dean, he decided to have another go at recording Careless Whisper. This time he planned to work with legendary Atlantic producer Jerry Wexler, the man who coined the phrase rhythm and blues when he was a writer on Billboard magazine. The magic may well have been there for Aretha Franklin, but George didn't feel comfortable with Wexler's arrangement. But before he could try again, back in England, he and Ridgely found themselves in the Royal Courts of Justice in the Strand as they tried to free themselves from Innovision. It was a slow business with no more money coming in. Wham went on their first British tour to earn some cash. All went well until the end, when Michael's throat gave out and the final concerts had to be rescheduled.
Most of us want to leave something, want to have something that will be remembered without people really having to search in their memory. And I want to leave songs. I believe I can leave songs that will mean something to other generations.
In the meantime, Innovision's parent company, CBS, was getting fed up with the legal dispute that had left them with no new Wham music to put out. They put pressure on Dean to settle. He received an undisclosed sum, plus a small royalty on Wham's record sales. The whole affair saw the end of Innovision, however, and the company went under a year later. Once out of their Innovision contract, Wham signed to CBS subsidiary Epic. Their comeback single was based on a note Ridgely left one day for his mother: "Wake me up before you go-go." Michael read it, and the title "Wake Me Up Before You Go-Go" was virtually in place. His own production of Wake Me Up was a great success, and he decided to tackle the re-recording of Careless Whisper. This time, the early song came out just as he wanted, with synthesized instrumental parts and his voice put through a computer. Wake Me Up was Wham's first #1 in Britain, and it also hit the top spot in 9 other countries, including the USA. It was George and Andrew's first gold disc.
George came round my house, and I had a note on my door for my mother to wake me up, and I'd misspelt it. I'd put "wake me up," so I finished it off "before you go," and he thought, good
I thought
line
"Wake Me
for
Up
a
Before You
song.
Go" would be a great line for a song, and then realised that it actually made a great title.
It all gave the duo the highest possible publicity profile. Both lads liked a good time, but they didn't go out much together. George favoured the quieter night spots where he could misbehave with a reasonable degree of anonymity. Andrew preferred the bright lights where the press cameras could capture him in all his drunken glory. Soon, though, the pair were bound for the south of France to both write and record Make It Big, their second album. It was easy to work away from the hurly-burly of London, and Michael even thought up the melody of one of the best tracks on the album, Freedom, in a cab en route to the airport. The experience highlighted the difference between the two members of Wham. Andrew Ridgeley wasn't involved in the songwriting and spent a large part of the time looking at France through the bottom of a bottle. George Michael was writing the material, George Michael was working with the other musicians and on the production. George Michael was the real talent in Wham. When the album came out, Michael had all the songwriting credits, apart from the co-billing with Ridgeley on Careless Whisper and a cover of the Isley Brothers song If You Were There. George Michael was also credited with lead and backing vocals, keyboards, producer and arranger. Ridgeley's credit read electric guitar. To be frank, much of the material wasn't the strongest, and while it was being mixed, Careless Whisper was brought out as George Michael's first solo release. It was number 1 in Britain within a fortnight. He insisted that he could develop a solo career and keep Wham going as well. No one with any experience in the music industry believed it.
I think my progression has been natural, and it's a writer's progression. Other people just see it as part of this big, ascendant career.
In the meantime, Summers and Napier Bell's No Miss ousted Wisner and DeMann, thus taking control of the group's American affairs as well. PR specialist Gary Farrow was brought in to help crack the American market thoroughly, but without the back-breaking years of touring that most artists felt obliged to put themselves through. Freedom from the Make It Big album was released as a single and went to number 1 in Britain, as did the album itself, while Wake Me Up hit the top spot in the States. Make It Big took off more slowly in the USA, but eventually topped the charts. 1985 closed with Wham's holiday double A side single, Last Christmas, Everything She Wants, as number 2 in Britain, behind Band-Aid's Do They Know It's Christmas, the all-star charity record that George Michael sang on. In America, Careless Whisper was credited to Wham, featuring George Michael, and that also went to number 1. Last Christmas wasn't put out in the States until March '86, and royalties for that were also charity bound to the Ethiopian Fund. Wham started a world tour in early December, but once again, George Michael's health gave way when he damaged his back. Dates had to be rescheduled, but the new year saw them on the second leg of their tour, taking in Japan, Australia and the USA. The boys took their families along, but even that couldn't stop them from going on the razzle-dazzle. George Michael hated the crazy, pressurised life on the road, but the rewards for all his work were pouring in. It wasn't just money, mind you. Elton John called him the Paul McCartney of his generation when he presented him with an Ivor Novello Award for Songwriter of the Year at the annual British Phonographic Industry Awards at the Grosvenor Hotel in London in February '85.
At times I was thinking, I'm never going to get out of this, I'm never going to be seen as a writer, I'm never going to get my credibility back, but I just kept going.
Careless Whisper also brought him the Most Performed Work Award, but there was a cloud on the horizon, the visit to China arranged by Napier Bell. Lindsay Anderson's film crew added to the logistical problems of a trip which quickly proved to be nothing more than a clever propaganda exercise by the Chinese government. Anderson was confined to a wheelchair following a fall which hardly helped the filming, and with no dancing allowed in the audiences, Wham were forced to tone down their staged act to suit the authorities. Worldwide publicity had been massive, though neither George nor Andrew came back pleased. George was left with a dislike of governmental exploitation of pop music and of the British tabloid press with its constant appetite for pointless trivia. The duo did have one success during the episode though. A couple of cassettes had been released in China. One was a compilation for their first 2 albums, and the second shared tracks with popular Chinese singer Cheng Fang Yue. When they learned she was to receive just £15 from the release, George and Ridley demanded she receive her proper due of royalties. George's interest in the filming had been next to negligible. Anderson's accident hadn't improved matters, and the film crew had encountered a lot of difficulties with local officials. The result of their efforts didn't see the light of day for a year, when it emerged as a video called Foreign Skies, and created little interest. A trip far more pleasing to George came when Stevie Wonder invited him to take part in Motown Returns to the Apollo, a show at the famous Harlem Theatre in New York. Then came the biggest charity show of them all, the Bob Geldof organised Live Aid at Wembley Stadium in London on Saturday, July the 13th, 1985, with the action transferring over the Atlantic to JFK Stadium in Philadelphia. Even with several generations of pop and rock stars performing, George Michael's duet with Elton John, plus a little help from Kiki Dee, was one of the highlights of the entire day.
I never wanted to be someone else. I wanted to be a star, and I wanted people to love me and recognise me in the street. As a child, that was what I wanted, but I never really wanted to be someone else.
By now, it was becoming obvious that Wham was no longer a joint venture between two equal partners, if in fact it had ever been so. Ridgely's visual contribution in the early days should never be overlooked, but George Michael was clearly on an upward musical curve that his partner had no chance of keeping up with. Both were accused of being less than financially generous with their musicians, and Tommy Eyre, their musical director, walked out towards the end of their next American tour. He wasn't to know it, but George Michael was on the brink of a split of his own. Ridgely must have seen the writing on the wall, and possibly was the first to do so. There is no doubt that George Michael wanted to let his partner down lightly, and the management team drew up careful plans to wind up Wham and launch George Michael as a solo star as smoothly as possible. First, there was a new single to put out, I'm Your Man. It topped the British charts, but peaked at number 3 in America. Press rumours of the impending split were denied even as plans for a final Wembley concert and last release, an EP, were in hand. Even an artist as self-confident as George Michael must have had some doubts when it came to the big moment of shedding Ridgely and striking it out on his own. He was finding the attentions of the press irksome in the extreme, and the collapse of a romance with an unnamed woman after just a brief fling can hardly have boosted his personal confidence. But he was very keen to shed the teeny bopper Wham image and to be taken much more seriously as a writer and singer. It was a very difficult period though, as depression engulfed him. There were brawls with friends and temper tantrums with press photographers. Eventually he couldn't take any more and left the country for Australia with Ridgely and a couple of friends, John Fowler and David Riddler. It enabled George and Ridgely to wind down together and must have helped them bring Wham to the kind of amicable end that seems to elude most other disintegrating groups. After the holiday, George Michael struck up a friendship with Chinese-American model Kathy Young, a woman with whom he felt comfortable and secure.
I couldn't have wished for anything better to happen in the sense that my career needed to go somewhere, I needed to do an about turn.
But his security was shattered when he learned that Napier Bell and Summers had sold No Mismanagement to a firm with links to South Africa, at the time a country still in the grip of apartheid, and a pariah to anyone in the rest of the world with even the tiniest social conscience. The deal involved noted rock promoter Harvey Goldsmith, whose company had formed Allied Entertainments in 1984 by merging with Hotel Television Network. The new company floated on the stock exchange and was taken over by Cunic Leisure in the August of 1985. Cunic offered $5 million for Nomis, to be paid in stages of 5 years, with Napier Bell and Summers staying on, their pockets boosted by big salaries and big money available to expand Nomis's business. But it turned out the largest shareholder in Cunic was South African Sol Kersner. His massive business interests included the Botswana luxury gambling centre known as Sun City, a resort designed for rich white South Africans to play in and built on the exploitation of cheap black labour. With a solo career about to be launched and a reputation for taking on an anti-apartheid stand publicly, the whole deal was a potential disaster for George Michael. Just what a foolish trap they had fallen into dawned too late for Napier Bell and Summers to salvage their relationship with the singer. He froze them out in exactly the same way as he had in the vision earlier. The bad feelings spilled over into George's relationship with Andrew, and one night they had a fist fight in Stringfellow's nightclub. When Michael wanted Ridgely to co-sign a statement cutting off Wham from No Miss, Andrew wanted more time to consider all the implications. George refused to wait, and the statement was issued on his own behalf. No Miss then issued a press release to say they were still representing Andrew Ridgely. It was quite a cunning move, because all the attention focused on a Wham breakup and not George's reasons for wanting to dump No Miss. But it wasn't long before Ridgely too decided that he'd had enough of Napier Bell and Summers, and without Wham on board, the whole deal with Cunic Leisure collapsed. Summers and Napier Bell split up in the wake of the whole fiasco, and though Goldsmith cleverly slipped out of the shambles, buying back Allied Entertainment by selling his Cunic shares, George Michael had also lost faith in him. He switched the staging of Wham's farewell concert at Wembley to another promoter, Mel Bush.